Next on Currents News, supporters are in Albany today as there's about to be a major change in New York law dealing with child sex abuse. What's in the measure and the church's reaction? Pope Francis, heading home from World Youth Day, made news on several key stories during his in-flight press conference. The crisis in mostly Catholic Venezuela is getting a lot worse. 2 men claim to be president. I talked to an expert about the country's future. Plus, a big change in an officially godless country. A new church is born. The news starts right now. Good evening, everyone. I'm Liz Faublas. The law is about to change in New York over child sexual abuse. The Democrat-controlled legislature is poised to approve, and Governor Andrew Cuomo is ready to sign the Child Victims Act. For years, the Catholic Church opposed the measure, but that has changed too. Currents News' Emily Druby reports the latest.
With the help of a new Democratic majority in the state Senate, Governor Andrew Cuomo made it his mission to pass the Child Victims Act.
Because if you believe in justice for all, then you believe in passing the Child Victims Act.
The new law makes several changes. First, it extends the age at which child sexual abuse survivors can file civil lawsuits. Right now it's 23. It would be raised to 55. It would also create what is being called a look-back window. Basically, anyone previously barred from suing because of the statute of limitations could during a one-time only period that would last a year. On the criminal side, victims would be able to press felony charges until they're 28 years old. New York State Catholic Conference, which represents New York's bishops, recently withdrew their long-standing opposition to the bill after it was broadened to include survivors of abuse no matter where it took place, including in the public school system. The Catholic Conference adding they've long supported including in the legislation, quote, additional measures such as removal of criminal statutes of limitation completely, funding for safe environment training for public and private institutions, and compensation programs for those who prefer it to litigation. This morning in Albany, Governor Cuomo, who is Catholic, said he believes this act is in line with Pope Francis's beliefs.
That I am wholly in line with what Pope Francis has said on this issue.
During the press conference, which also featured lawmakers and child abuse survivors, the governor, for a second time in 2 weeks, quoted the Pope.
The abuse of minors is an offense so brutal the church cannot remain indifferent to this, and the church must punish such priests, and that includes to support the legal action.
The Senate vote is scheduled for today. The Assembly already passed the bill. Passage is expected. In fact, during that press conference, the governor was speaking as if it was a sure thing. Liz?
All right, Emily, thank you so much. With the Child Victims Act moving through the legislature and heading to the governor's desk, Monsignor Kieran Harrington, the Brooklyn Diocese Vicar for Communications, will be with me tomorrow on Currents News to dig deeper into the new law. Tonight, Pope Francis is back at the Vatican after making news on his flight from Panama and World Youth Day. He tackled several critical and developing stories. Melissa Butts is standing by outside St. Peter's Basilica with those details.
Pope Francis has just arrived back in Rome, and after his 12-hour flight, he spoke to journalists in an in-flight press conference about many topics, including the upcoming summit on sexual abuse in February, the political situation in Venezuela, and reasons why young people are leaving the church. In anticipation of next month's upcoming summit on sexual abuse, Pope Francis spoke aboard the papal plane, saying many bishops don't know how to fix situations of abuse. Thus, he said there were 3 steps he wants to instill in them at the meeting.
Entonces, primo, che prendano coscienza di questo. Secondo, che sappiano cosa si deve fare, la procedura. Ho percepito un po' un'aspettativa gonfiata. Bisogna sgonfiare le aspettative a questi punti che io dico, perché il problema degli abusi continuerà. È un problema umano, ma umano dappertutto.
Then Pope Francis commented on Venezuela after his statement on Sunday calling for a just and peaceful solution to the political crisis.
Las palabras las pensé, las repensé, ¿no? Y creo que con esto expresé mi cercanía, lo que siento. Yo sufro por lo que está pasando en Venezuela en este momento.
After drawing close to youth during the October Synod and this past week, he also reflected on the reasons young people leave the faith.
Ma il più generale, credo che il primo è la mancanza di testimonianza dei cristiani, dei preti, dei vescovi. Non dico dei papi perché è troppo.
It was a 45-minute-long meeting in which journalists saw the Pope visibly tired, but pleased at what he had experienced at World Youth Day in Panama. Upon arriving back in Rome, the first stop the Pope made was to the Basilica of St. Mary Major to thank the Blessed Mother for a safe and successful trip. At the Vatican, Melissa Butts, Currents News. Back to you in New York, Liz.
Thank you, Melissa. New York's Pope station, Net TV, provided continuous special coverage over 4 days of the Pope at World Youth Day. The global celebration of the Catholic faith included a large delegation from the Brooklyn Diocese. Currents News' Tim Harfman accompanied them to the Central American country. He's standing by right now in Panama City as the pilgrims head home. Tim.
Liz, before boarding their planes, young Catholics from Brooklyn and Queens reflected on their experiences, saying what they're bringing home with them isn't in their luggage, but in their minds and hearts. Snapping their fingers in solidarity after each reflection, nearly 200 pilgrims from Brooklyn and Queens expressed their emotions.
Coming over here really made me think about how to improve the youth and how to get more people involved.
There's no place I'd rather be than here in your love.
Their reflections continued through song. For Shaba Pierre, a college student from Brooklyn, the World Youth Day pilgrimage was an opportunity for cleansing.
You don't notice how filthy, how dirty you are until you finally just give everything to God and let him know, like, I'm sorry for this and I'm sorry for that.
She believes she received forgiveness through the sacrament of confession while in Panama.
Now I can finally go back home, start school fresh, be home fresh.
The pilgrimage included walking long distances in the heat, spending the night outdoors after Saturday's vigil, then morning mass with the Pope and a huge crowd of young people. Pilgrims realized they're not alone.
I definitely feel more connected with my peers, more connected with my own culture as well as cultures of other people around me. And that's something that will go over a lot of people's heads, being that we don't really appreciate, other cultures.
And hearing the Holy Father's message about saying yes to God, a young man said he's now inspired to go home and spread his faith.
We are about love, community, preserving the environment, protecting the unborn, and most of all, loving Jesus.
Father Gerard Sauer, director of pilgrimages for the Brooklyn Diocese, said most importantly, the global gathering was meant to strengthen young faith.
Watching them get emotional or sing or cry for a good reason, and that means their hearts have been opened, their hearts have been touched, and World Youth Day has been a success.
And addressing the pilgrims, Queens priest Father Jose Diaz said, "You may be going home to broken homes and personal struggles, but never forget what you experienced here at World Youth Day, that you are the hope and the future of the church." In Panama City, Tim Harfman, Currents News. Back to you in Brooklyn, Liz.
All right, Tim, thank you so much for that report. The latest now on the deadly terror attack against a Catholic cathedral in the Philippines. President Rodrigo Duterte went to the scene this morning, the Cathedral of Our Lady of Mount Carmel in the southern part of the mostly Catholic country. He is vowing to hunt down the bombers. At least 20 people were killed when the explosions occurred during Sunday Mass. ISIS has claimed responsibility for the blasts. A condemnation of the terrorism tonight from the leader of the Catholic bishops in the Philippines. In addition, Archbishop Romulo Valles said, quote, "We also express our sympathies with those who were wounded and extend our solidarity with the rest of the churchgoers inside the cathedral and the rest of the church community." Today was the first day back on the job for a huge number of federal workers. They'd been shut out of their employment for more than a month, and that could happen again soon. Omar Jimenez is in Washington with the latest.
The government is back open for now, but congressional negotiations are going to have to kick into overdrive to keep it that way. More than a month after the shutdown started, the central issue remains the same: the wall.
I was down on the border last May, and what the CBP told me was they needed more agents, we need more immigration judges, we need better technology, especially at our ports of entry, and in some places we need to improve fencing. What we need to be doing is focus on what the experts are telling us they need.
But it's not going to be easy, and President Trump now tells the Wall Street Journal he is skeptical a deal can be met and would not rule out another government shutdown.
I think that he is seeing the negotiations for what it is. This is an opportunity for Congress to act. It's an opportunity for Congress to speak with the experts.
Over the course of the 35-day-long shutdown, little progress was made. All the while, hundreds of thousands of federal workers were left hung out to dry.
It's exhilarating knowing that we'll get paid for in the future, and now we can get back to work.
It also hurt the U.S. economy as a whole. It lost $11 billion during the government shutdown, according to the Congressional Budget Office, and they estimate while most will eventually be recovered, around $3 billion won't be. In Washington, Omar Jimenez, Currents News.
There's word tonight that Hillary Clinton could mount another run at the White House. Unnamed sources are saying the two-time former presidential candidate is keeping her options open and has told several people she's not closed the door to another campaign for the presidency, this time in 2020. Tonight, there's news another Central American caravan heading toward the U.S. is swelling in size. Reportedly, more than 12,000 people are marching to Mexico's southern border. Most of the people on the move are Hondurans. Migrants, caravans, and the Trump border wall are likely to be big issues in the next election. There's a lot more news headed your way. A major disaster in Brazil, the world's largest Catholic country. Many are dead and many more are missing. Venezuela reeling tonight. A special look at how people are suffering, and I talk with an expert about the future. The triumph of Christ in what's been officially godless communist country. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@thesalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number, 718-517-3122. We'll be right back. The latest now on a catastrophe in the world's most populous Catholic country. Brazilian authorities fear as many as 300 people are missing, and they may never be found after a dam collapsed in the southeastern part of the country. The death toll stands at 60 tonight. Most of the missing worked for Brazil's largest mining company. The employees were eating lunch Friday when a torrent of water and mud slammed into them. Venezuela is in crisis. Moments ago, we heard Pope Francis express his concern. The White House is announcing new sanctions while violence grows in the mostly Catholic country. And two men claim they're the nation's president, current ruler Nicolas Maduro and opposition leader Juan Guaido. Patrick Ottman has an exclusive look at the rapidly worsening situation inside Caracas.
Cross into Venezuela's unending disaster, the world's worst growing refugee crisis. Oil once made them the richest in South America, but this is now the line for 3 days and nights to get a full tank. In the capital, there's a queue for everything, everywhere. Hunger breeds a special kind of anger.
These groceries cost $50 now, but because of what's happening with the local currency, they'll be worth double at least by next month. People paying tomorrow's prices today.
This isn't play, it's practice for self-defense. My brother got killed in July by another gang, says 14-year-old Usmaria. They found the body in the river. We gather stuff, we beg, a piece of chicken skin to take home. In the socialist utopia that now leaves nearly every stomach empty. This was the day when change was meant to come. Hundreds of thousands flooding central Caracas, watching opposition leader Juan Guaido swear himself in as interim president. But it fast turned sour. They've had this standoff outside the military airfield here for months. But this is the first time with an opposition leader claiming the presidency. All eyes were on the army, and whether it too would rise up. This is the important question really in the standoff. It's about the military's vote. They may be throwing stones at them here, but what they really need is the army to switch sides. That didn't happen. And the police tear gas and motorcycle charges sent us fleeing down side streets. Yes, I know. Some likely wounded, although dozens reported dead during the day. Army defectors outside Venezuela called on soldiers to rise up. But we hear from one junior officer that even when you can't feed your family, it's more complicated. I would say 80% of soldiers are against the government. Some even go to demonstrations. But the big fishers, the senior officers, are the ones eating, getting rich, while at the bottom, we have it hard. I get $1.50 every month, promptly, enough for one chicken.
Would you, or the soldiers you know at your level, would you open fire on resistant people in the streets?
I'd rather quit. That person could be my brother or my mother. We need a general to flip, to make a change. And as Washington says Maduro isn't president, but Moscow insists he is, everyone else walks zombie-like, further and closer towards starvation. Nick Payton-Walsh, Caracas.
The crisis in Venezuela has world leaders divided. The U.S. is backing the opposition leader Juan Guaido, and Russia supports Nicolas Maduro. Pope Francis isn't picking sides, but he is urging peace. Antonio Mora is the editor-in-chief of newsandnews.com. He's a Latin American affairs expert and a former news anchor on ABC's Good Morning America, and he joins us now from Miami. Antonio, thank you so much for being with us.
Liz, always my
Antonio,
pleasure.
could the Venezuelan crisis become even more violent? For instance, is a civil war looming or military intervention from the outside?
There could be violence in so many different ways, Liz. This week, Guaido, the president who's been recognized by most of the major countries in the Americas and by most European countries, has called for more protests. Already there was a lot of violence last week. Dozens of people were likely killed, and who knows how many others were injured. So there's level on that violence, just the repression of protests. There could be violence on other levels. If Guaido, who has been talking, or at least he says he's been talking to some members of the military, manages to get some military defection, there could be infighting at the military level, and that, of course, would be a worrisome development. The bigger concern would be if there were a confrontation with the United States or sort of alliance of other countries. The danger of that happening immediately seemed to have faded a bit when Maduro backed down. You know, he expelled American diplomats. The U.S. said, you do not have any authority. The new president is Guaido. He's the only one who can expel diplomats. Maduro gave them a deadline for Saturday, and then he backed off, and they've extended it for a few weeks.
Antonio, Pope Francis is now speaking out publicly, saying he fears violence in Venezuela. Should the Latin American pontiff be doing other things to prevent a catastrophe?
Liz, that's a very good question, and it's a question many Venezuelans have been asking themselves for the past couple of years since the big protests started back in 2017. Venezuelans are upset that he has not been more emphatic about the terrible human rights violations that are going on in Venezuela, about tremendous hunger, the lack of medicines. He has really not been a forceful presence on Venezuela. As opposed to the Venezuelan Catholic Church, the hierarchy there, the bishops in Venezuela, have actually been quite strong and very supportive of the opposition and the demonstrators and the need for their rights to be respected.
Antonio, you have very keen insight into Venezuela, obviously. What's next in the near term and, of course, in the broader future? Quickly.
I think it's going to depend on how continuous the pressure can be on the Venezuelan people's side and also on the international side. Maduro will continue to have the support of Russia, to a lesser extent China, and of course Cuba. But the rest of the world now seems to finally be taking seriously the fact that this is a tremendous catastrophe. One of the richest countries in the world has now become one of the poorest. Almost 90% of the people there are living in poverty. Something needs to be done. The question inside Venezuela, to some extent, is going to be two questions. One, will the military turn on Maduro? And two, will the people from the poorer neighborhoods of Caracas and other cities turn against Maduro? And so far, that seems to be the case. Many of the protests last week were started in the poorer areas. So this is now, nobody can argue that this is a middle class opposition. This is an opposition that goes across all classes.
All right, Antonio, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. I know you have friends and family in Venezuela. Our prayers are with them. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Liz. My pleasure.
Still to come on Currents News, the value of a Catholic education is being celebrated with the kickoff to Catholic Schools Week. And for the first time in decades, a new Catholic church is opening in officially godless Cuba. We'll be right back. It's been a favorite for students in the Diocese of Brooklyn since 1974. Not a week of vacation, but 7 days to show off their faith and Catholic education. For the 45th year, Catholic schools in Brooklyn and Queens and across the United States are celebrating Catholic Schools Week. Each year, students, parents, and educators highlight what makes Catholic schools unique, focusing on the value Catholic education produces and its contributions to our church, communities, and nation. The week includes special presentations, masses, and open houses. And to learn more about the week-long festivities, pick up the latest edition of the tablet or go to thetablet.org for a complete list of open houses throughout the diocese. The first new Catholic church since the revolution is open tonight in communist Cuba. For decades, Cubans have suffered religious discrimination at the hands of the Castros. Patrick Oppman reports about the big change that's occurred.
This converted garage in the small Cuban town of Sandino is where Mass used to be held. The communist-run government wouldn't let the Catholic Church build a new house of worship in Sandino, or for that matter, anywhere else. On Saturday, Catholics in Sandino celebrated the first Mass at their new church, the first to be built on the island since the 1959 revolution.
Salir de la noche al día.
To see this finished is like coming out of night into the day, says the priest who oversaw the construction. We knew it would happen one day. The church was built with nearly $100,000 in donations from a sister diocese in Tampa. Soon after taking power, Fidel Castro suspected the Catholic Church was conspiring against his officially atheist state. Churches were shut down, priests thrown into re-education camps. A dark history that the town of Sandino knows all too well. In the early days of the Cuban Revolution, this remote town became notorious as a place where people accused of anti-government activities were sent to live in internal exile, a kind of Cuban Siberia. Now finally it's become famous for something else. The Cuban Catholic Church says times have changed and they no longer face the same discrimination they once did.
Y hay que decir que
if there was a problem once between the church and the state, he says, then those things have been overcome, thanks to God. A church 60 years in the making, and proof that hope is never lost. Patrick Oppman, Sandino, Cuba.
And that is Currents News. I'm Liz Faublas. Thank you so much for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.